I'm 56 years old, and if I'm being honest with myself, I never expected my life to turn into the kind of story people online argue about. The kind where half the comments say I should have been tougher, and the other half say I never should have given up on my kid in the first place. But here I am, and everything in this story happened exactly the way I'm about to tell it. The night everything finally broke, the night my son looked me dead in the eye and demanded I hand over my pickup truck, we weren't fighting, not at first. We were sitting at the kitchen table, same old table I bought when he was 5 and used to crawl into my lap while eating pancakes. He's 21 now. And that night, when he sat across from me, I didn't recognize him. His jaw was tight, his leg was bouncing. He wouldn't look at his food. And when he finally spoke, his voice had that edge, the one people get when they've been rehearsing a line they know they shouldn't say but are going to say anyway. "Dad," he told me, "I need the truck, like, permanently." The sentence didn't make sense at first. I blinked at him, waiting for him to laugh or smirk or at least explain what he meant. But he didn't. He just stared at me like it was obvious, like my truck, the one I'd worked years to pay off, the one I'd maintained with my own hands, the one thing I owned that felt like mine, somehow belonged to him. I swallowed hard and asked, "Why?" He looked offended that I even asked. "I just do. It's time you let it go. You don't need it like I do." And that's when something inside me cracked. Back before things went bad, if you'd told me 10 years ago that my son would speak to me like that, I'd have laughed in your face. Ethan was a good kid, smart, sensitive. He loved being outside with me, building things, fixing things, helping me change brake pads while asking 1,000 questions I never got tired of answering. We used to take long drives in that pickup together, just talking about life. But things shifted when he was around 15. It started small, skipping homework, talking back, hanging out with older kids who didn't care about school. When his mum and I divorced, it only added fuel to the fire. I tried to stay close, really tried, but no matter how many times I reached my hand out to him, he pulled further away. By 18, he was barely home. By 19, he'd dropped out of community college. By 20, he'd burned through every job I'd helped him get. Lately, whenever he came by, it was because he wanted something. Money, favours, rides. And now, my truck. Why the truck mattered? I know some people will say it's just a vehicle, but they don't get it. That truck was my first real purchase after the divorce, when I was rebuilding myself from the ground up. It was the thing that got me to work through snowstorms and summer heat. It was the thing I used to help friends move, haul lumber, pick up Ethan's first bike, drive him to football practice. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine. And Ethan knew that. He also knew he'd wrecked 2 cars already. He also knew he had no responsibility, no savings, no plan. I wasn't going to hand him something he hadn't earned. At least that's what I thought. The conversation that changed everything. When I told him no, the explosion I'd been trying to avoid for years finally happened. He shoved his chair back with a screech. "Unbelievable! You don't even use it the way I would. You're being selfish." "I'm being practical," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You're not ready for it." "I'm an adult." "Then start acting like one." His face twisted, not in anger, but in something worse, something hollow, detached, like he'd already decided I was the enemy. "You're the reason my life's stuck," he said. "You never help me when it matters." That one hurt, deep, because I had spent years helping him. Paying his debts, covering his fines, replacing his phones, replacing his car windows after some fight he wouldn't tell me about, God knows what else. But I said nothing, and that's when he went for the kill. "If you don't give me the truck," he said, "I swear to God I'll never speak to you again." There it was, the ultimatum, the emotional grenade, and something in me, some combination of fear, exhaustion, and heartbreak, made me exhale slowly and say the words that changed everything. "Fine, take it." He froze. Not because he expected to win, but because he expected a fight. I reached into my pocket, grabbed the keys, and set them on the table. "You want the truck," I said quietly. "It's yours." For a moment, guilt flickered across his face. Then it hardened into triumph. He snatched the keys, walked out the door, and didn't look back. And I watched him go, knowing something he didn't. When Ethan drove away that night, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow. The house went dead quiet the moment the taillights disappeared. No humming of the engine, no footsteps going up the stairs, no door slamming, no angry muttering, just silence. A silence I'd been living with for years. But somehow this time it felt final. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty driveway through the window. The truck looked wrong in someone else's hands, especially his. And even though I'd given him the keys willingly, it felt like I'd lost something I wasn't ready to let go of. But I also couldn't shake the other feeling, the one I'd been living with for months. Something was off with Ethan. Deeply off, and I didn't know what it was. That's why I put the GPS in the truck, not to spy, not to control him. But because I was scared, and because I had seen hints, small signs, that my son was going down a road he didn't understand. Why I put the tracker in a few weeks earlier, I'd gotten a call from a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice asked, "Is this Ethan's father?" Right away my stomach dropped. You don't get a question like that unless something's already wrong. I said, "Yes, what's going on?" But the guy hung up. No explanation, no follow-up, nothing. I asked Ethan about it the next day and he brushed it off. "Scammers, Dad, chill." But his eyes shifted to the side, the way they used to when he was 12 and lying about breaking a window. Then there were the strange messages popping up on his phone screen when he came by. Names I'd never heard, words like drop, front, and tonight, flashing past before he hid the phone. I didn't want to assume the worst, but after raising a teenage boy and watching him spiral for years, you get instincts, loud ones. That's what led me to the tracker. I bought it online, a small magnetic unit meant for fleet vehicles. It tucked right behind the rear wheel well where nobody would think to look. I convinced myself I'd never have to check it, but I did. That very night. The first disturbing location, I waited an hour after he drove off before I opened the GPS app. My hands actually shook. Maybe I expected to see the truck still sitting somewhere normal, his girlfriend's apartment, the gas station he liked, the diner with the cheap burgers. But no, the little blinking dot was parked behind an abandoned textile mill on the east side of town, a place people stayed away from for two reasons. One, it had been condemned 20 years earlier. Two, it had become a hub for drug deals, robberies, and gang activity. My heart started pounding. Why the hell would Ethan be there? I stared at the map for 10 straight minutes, hoping it was a glitch, but the dot didn't move. Finally, I grabbed my jacket, keys, and phone and headed out, telling myself I was just checking, making sure he was safe, not interfering. But I didn't make it more than a mile before the dot moved. The truck jolted back onto the main road and sped across town toward a cluster of bars and clubs I knew Ethan had been frequenting. I didn't follow any more that night. I told myself I shouldn't overreact, but I didn't sleep, not 1 second. The next morning, more red flags. At 9:12 a.m., the GPS pinged again. The truck had been parked overnight behind a rundown motel on the edge of the county, a place with hourly rates, boarded windows, broken vending machines, and a police record longer than a grocery receipt. I felt sick. I texted him, "You good?" No response. I waited half an hour and texted again. "Call me." Nothing. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. That knot in my chest tightened until I almost couldn't breathe. Every worst-case scenario flooded my mind. Drugs, gangs, debt, people using him, people hurting him, people he owed something to. I knew my son had been slipping, but this was a different level. The moment everything tipped, around noon, the truck started moving again. I watched the dot travel along a route that made no sense, weaving through side streets, doubling back, pausing in strange places for a few minutes before moving again. Then it stopped. This time, in front of a house I recognized instantly. I'd been there before, once, a year earlier. Ethan had taken me to meet some friends, guys I told him straight to his face he needed to stay away from, the kind who had empty eyes, twitchy hands, and walked around with the inflated confidence of people who thought they were untouchable because they'd never been caught. I told him then, "These boys are trouble." He told me, "You're overreacting." I wasn't. Seeing my truck parked outside their place made my blood run cold, and while I stared at the map trying to decide what to do, another ping came through, a location update that made my stomach drop to the floor. The truck wasn't just parked there, it was moving again, but this time, someone else was driving it. So the moment I realized someone else was driving my truck, I felt a strange, cold stillness settle inside me. Not panic, not anger, something deeper, a kind of quiet dread that presses against your ribs and whispers, "Your son is in trouble you don't understand yet." I stared at the little blinking dot on the map as it moved north fast, steady, purposeful. Whoever was behind the wheel wasn't wandering. They knew exactly where they were going. I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly, but every breath felt like it scraped the inside of my chest. Where was Ethan? Why wasn't he with the truck? Was he hurt? Passed out? Left behind somewhere? Or, God forbid, being used as leverage? When you're a parent, your mind doesn't wander to bad scenarios. It sprints there. The first call, ignored. I dialed Ethan again. Voicemail. I tried texting this time. "Son, where are you? I need you to answer me. Now." No response. I watched the truck make a left turn near the highway on ramp 1 I knew too well. It was the road that led out toward Red Ridge, an area with barely any houses and even fewer reasons to visit unless you were into illegal hunting, illegal dumping, or illegal deals. My pulse kicked up. I got in my car. I wasn't sure what I was planning to do, but sitting at home wasn't an option anymore. The drive, every mile heavier than the last. For the first 10 minutes, I just followed the GPS from my phone. The truck was far ahead, but I kept hoping maybe it would stop somewhere that made sense. Somewhere Ethan would be. A friend's house, a job site, a store. But it didn't. It kept going and going, deeper into the most deserted part of the county. My hands were tight around the steering wheel, tight enough that my knuckles throbbed. "Please be okay," I whispered to nobody. "Please, Ethan, just be okay." I wasn't even sure who I was begging, my son, God, or fate. Then the truck stopped. Dead stop. In a place where nothing existed but dirt, trees, and old broken logging trails. A clearing near Bear Creek. A place you only went if you didn't want to be found. I pulled into a turnout about a quarter-mile away and killed my engine. My heartbeat was thundering so loudly in my ears it almost drowned out the chirping of insects around me. The truck was stationary, but the map wasn't telling me who was with it, or what they were doing, or whether my son was alive. I sat there staring at that dot until my throat went dry. Finally, I opened my car door. The air smelled like pine sap and dirt. The kind of smell I used to love when Ethan was a kid and we'd camp out here. Back then, he'd run around barefoot, laughing, fearless. I could still hear the echoes of it sometimes. But now those woods felt wrong, like they were holding their breath. I walked toward the clearing. Slow. Quiet. Every twig that cracked under my boots made me flinch. I didn't know what I was walking into. I didn't know if anyone had a weapon. I didn't know if Ethan was lying somewhere hurt or worse, but I kept going. Because I'm his father. Because even after all the arguments, all the disrespect, all the bitter years between us, he is my son. And if he was in that clearing, then so was I. The path curved, and I stepped through a tangle of brush into a small open space where the truck sat parked between two massive pines. Then I froze, because standing beside the driver's door were 3 men I didn't recognize. One tall and wiry, one stocky with a shaved head, and one leaning against a stump flicking a lighter open and shut. They weren't kids. They weren't lost hikers. They weren't confused civilians. They were men who lived on the edge of trouble, and from the look of them, they were comfortable there. But more importantly, my son was not there. My stomach dropped so hard I felt dizzy. Then one of them noticed me. His voice cut through the clearing. "Hey, can I help you with something?" The other two turned. 3 sets of eyes locked on me. Everything in me screamed to turn around and run, but I didn't. I swallowed the fear, stood straighter, and forced my voice not to shake. "That's my truck." A moment of silence, then the stocky one smirked. "This? No, man, Ethan let us borrow it." Hearing my son's name out of his mouth felt like a slap. "Where is he?" I asked. Worry Guy crossed his arms. "Why are you looking for him?" "Because he's my son." The 3 exchanged glances, quick, subtle, but telling. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. I wasn't sure if they were lying to... The moment those 3 men vanished into the trees, I was left standing alone beside my truck with a stomach full of ice. The clearing around me felt wrong, too still, too quiet, like the woods were bracing for something bad. I didn't move for a few seconds. I just listened. wind through branches, a creaking tree. My own heartbeat hammering in my ears. Then I heard it, the sound that changed everything. A second engine, deeper, heavier, coming closer. Whoever those men were running from, they were almost here. I didn't know what to do. Stay, hide, run, try to confront whoever was arriving. My instincts pulled in two directions at once. Fear telling me to get out, fatherhood pulling me deeper into danger. But then I heard something I couldn't ignore. A voice, a young one, faint, struggling, like someone weak, or maybe scared. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then it came again, muffled, pained, and unmistakably Ethan's. Every muscle in my body locked. My breath caught in my throat. He was here. He had to be. The men didn't say anything about him, didn't hand him over, didn't mention where he was, because they didn't want me looking for him, because they weren't done with him, because they knew whoever was coming down that dirt road probably had dirtier intentions than they did. And Ethan, my son, he was caught between them. I moved toward the truck bed. I should have been focused on leaving, on preserving myself, on calling for help. But I didn't care about any of that. I cared about one thing, finding my boy. I walked around to the passenger side of the truck, scanning the ground, the trees, the shadows, looking for any sign of him. Nothing. I moved toward the back of the clearing where the brush was thicker, still nothing. Then I saw it. A scrap of cloth caught on a branch. Dark blue, frayed. A torn piece from the hoodie Ethan always wore. My throat tightened. He had been here, recently, probably within minutes. But where had they taken him? The second vehicle arrived. I ducked behind a fallen log just as the sound of gravel crunching under heavy tyres filled the clearing. A black SUV pulled in, big enough to carry 6 men, tinted enough to hide anything. 3 men climbed out, not kids, not junkies, not small-time troublemakers. These were men with hardened faces and stiff, practiced movements. Men who didn't flinch at danger, because they were danger. They scanned the clearing instantly, like they were expecting an ambush. I held my breath. One of them spotted the truck. That's it. That's Rivera's kid's ride. My stomach lurched. Rivera. They knew Ethan. They knew me. Another man stepped forward, looking the truck up and down. He was supposed to bring the money, he said. No truck, just cash. And if he didn't, someone asked. The man spit into the dirt. We take something else. I didn't have to guess what that meant. Collateral, leverage, punishment. My son wasn't just in debt. He was in danger of being destroyed by men who lived outside the lines of law, morality, or mercy. Then I heard it again. A muffled thud, a weak groan. Off to the left, deeper into the trees. The men didn't hear it. They were too focused on the truck, on the bag left behind, on whatever deal had been sabotaged by Ethan's disappearance. But I heard it, and it was closer now. I slipped backward, inch by inch, careful not to snap a branch or rustle a leaf, until I reached the tree line. Then I moved through the woods, following the faint sounds, groans, dragging footsteps, pained breathing. Each one made my stomach twist tighter. I pushed aside a branch, and my heart nearly stopped. I found him. Ethan was slumped on the ground near a tree, one hand braced against the trunk, the other clutched around his ribs. His hoodie was torn, his cheek was bruised, his lip was split. He looked small, helpless. Nothing like the angry young man who demanded my truck the night before. For a moment he didn't even see me. He was staring at the dirt, breathing in ragged gasps. Then I whispered, "Ethan." His head snapped up, eyes wide with confusion. Then shame. "Dad?" he croaked. I was beside him in an instant, kneeling, checking his injuries, fighting the urge to completely break down. "What did they do to you?" I asked, voice cracking. He shook his head, coughing weakly. They wanted money. I thought I could pay it back. I didn't know they'd..." He winced in pain, stopping mid-sentence. I pressed my hand to his shoulder, steadying him. "Save it. We're getting you out of here." But before I could pull him up, we both heard footsteps behind us. Snapping branches. Voices. Flashlights cutting through the trees. The men from the SUV. And they were close. Too close. Ethan's voice trembled. "Dad, they said if I ran, they'd..." "It doesn't matter," I whispered fiercely. "I've got you. I'm not leaving you." But the truth was brutal. We were trapped between the clearing behind us and 3 armed men closing in from the other side. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no way they were letting us walk out of this quietly. I pulled Ethan behind me, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The men were seconds away, and I knew this was going to end one of 2 ways. The day of the ceremony arrived with a kind of nervous electricity I hadn't felt since graduation. I kept telling myself I didn't care whether I won, but the truth was I did. Maybe not for bragging rights, but because winning would mean I hadn't imagined the value of what I'd created. It would mean my work actually mattered somewhere outside my own head. When I walked into the hall, I immediately saw Liam on stage adjusting the projector. He gave a stiff nod when he noticed me, the professional kind, stripped of anything personal. That nod alone told me he'd already heard rumours. My nomination had spread through the academy like wildfire. I took a seat in the 6th row. My hands wouldn't stay still. I kept opening and closing them like I had to convince myself they were real. The host went through several awards: Best Youth Initiative, Most Innovative Tech Integration, Environmental Leadership, each followed by applause and 4 smiles from people pretending not to be crushed. But when they reached the category I was nominated for, everything inside me went still, like my body had hit a pause button. And the recipient, the host announced, tearing open the envelope, of this year's Outstanding Research Award is Evelyn Carter for Silent Streams, Mapping Forgotten Rivers Through Sound. My ears rang. For a second I genuinely thought I had misheard. Then the room erupted. I stood slowly, as if the air had become thick. People were clapping, some enthusiastically, some politely, some reluctantly, but all of them were clapping for me. I walked toward the stage like it wasn't entirely my body doing it, like momentum had taken over where courage failed. Liam stepped back from the podium, and our eyes met for just a fraction of a second. His face was unreadable, not angry, not happy, not proud, just blank. Like he was witnessing something he hadn't calculated for. The award was heavier than I expected. When they handed it to me, I felt its weight settle into my palms like the solid proof of every lonely night in the library, every rejected paper, every person including Liam who had brushed past me like I was no one. I gave my speech brief, steady, maybe even a little graceful, nothing dramatic, nothing vengeful, just truth. But when I stepped off the stage, there was a shift in the room around me. People who had ignored me were suddenly warm and curious. Professors who had barely remembered my name were offering business cards. The air felt different, not because they had changed, but because now they saw what I had always been building. And somewhere behind all the noise, I felt a quiet realization settling in. My revenge had never needed cruelty. Success had done the speaking for me. The day of the ceremony arrived with a kind of nervous electricity I hadn't felt since graduation. I kept telling myself I didn't care whether I won, but the truth was I did. Maybe not for bragging rights, but because winning would mean I hadn't imagined the value of what I'd created. It would mean my work actually mattered somewhere outside my own head. When I walked into the hall, I immediately saw Liam on stage adjusting the projector. He gave a stiff nod when he noticed me, the professional kind, stripped of anything personal. That nod alone told me he'd already heard rumours. My nomination had spread through the academy like wildfire. I took a seat in the 6th row. My hands wouldn't stay still. I kept opening and closing them like I had to convince myself they were real. The host went through several awards: Best Youth Initiative, Most Innovative Tech Integration, Environmental Leadership, each followed by applause and 4 smiles from people pretending not to be crushed. But when they reached the category I was nominated for, everything inside me went still, like my body had hit a pause button. And the recipient, the host announced, tearing open the envelope, of this year's Outstanding Research Award is Evelyn Carter for Silent Streams, Mapping Forgotten Rivers Through Sound. My ears rang. For a second I genuinely thought I had misheard. Then the room erupted. I stood slowly, as if the air had become thick. People were clapping, some enthusiastically, some politely, some reluctantly, but all of them were clapping for me. I walked toward the stage like it wasn't entirely my body doing it, like momentum had taken over where courage failed. Liam stepped back from the podium, and our eyes met for just a fraction of a second. His face was unreadable, not angry, not happy, not proud, just blank. Like he was witnessing something he hadn't calculated for. The award was heavier than I expected. When they handed it to me, I felt its weight settle into my palms like the solid proof of every lonely night in the library, every rejected paper, every person including Liam who had brushed past me like I was no one. I gave my speech brief, steady, maybe even a little graceful, nothing dramatic, nothing vengeful, just truth. But when I stepped off the stage, there was a shift in the room around me. People who had ignored me were suddenly warm and curious. Professors who had barely remembered my name were offering business cards. The air felt different, not because they had changed, but because now they saw what I had always been building. And somewhere behind all the noise, I felt a quiet realization settling in. My revenge had never needed cruelty. Success had done the speaking for me.